Hey, welcome everybody. How you doing? Welcome back. We are Economics Help Videos, and we got a little website going. We're still trying to, improve it. It'll be something that we'll keep working on, especially some of the technology issues. We're trying to see if we can deal with all those. Economic Help Videos, and the website is econhelpvideos.com. So we shortened up the economics to econ. And we're trying in this first series of videos to try and give you some help with mastering the demand and supply model, the market model, right? That's the core of all capitalism, right? And free markets and all of those kinds of issues. And we really think we can help you over the tough parts. And then you can decide if you like that or not. We've got more videos coming on other parts of both the introductory economics classes, introductory microeconomics and introductory macroeconomics, okay? So additionally, I wanted to mention that today's video is supply 00S for supply. We did the 00D for demand, right? Demand 00D, and that was the Apple stock price example. Here, we're going to do TTB stock, tough times bank. So I just wanted to make it general because about 5 years ago or so, many of the financial institutions and banks were in a lot of trouble as the Great Recession hit. And we're still, millions of people unemployed, very high unemployment rate. The economy is still feeling a lot of the effects of that. So lots of issues related to that. We'll talk more about them in the future. My name's Tommy, and thank you so much for watching today. Sorry for doing all that. Now, I just want to warn you, we're very, very old school, very low tech, but we're doing that on purpose. I'm trying to write on these presentation sheets and not do anything super fancy or super technological, because I'm trying to get you to connect with the idea that a lot of the intro models need you, if you're going to try and master these, to do it by hand, right? Now, the old idea of doing long division by hand before you started using the calculator. Remember when your math teacher made you do that? Same theme here is what we're trying to do. I'm trying to do this in sort of an almost, like I say, so low tech, it's almost silly, right? But that's on purpose, right? We're trying to do that on purpose. Okay, so back to today's video. The example I wanted to try and use was something like Citigroup. I don't mean to be picking on Citigroup. But about 5 years ago, around this time, August of 2007, their stock was trading about $46.88. Less than a couple years later, when the recession was really kicking in about the middle of March, which is when the entire stock market was collapsing and hit its bottom, they were trading for $1.54. So literally that was a signal a lot of investors weren't sure they were going to be around. They were going to be taken over, or their value was just going to zero. Now, very recently in 2012, in August of 2012, they're back to $28.56. So not all the way back, and in fact their stock price was even higher than this earlier, but they're doing much better, like many of the banks. But we're going to try and do the example of going from the $46, $47 down to $1.50 or so. Okay, so tough times bank, right? What happens when there's bad news about a stock? Okay, so that's what we're going to do. And I just wanted to mention that we have a word handout with this. It's 2 pages, and it follows the same pattern as the demand one. We have 3 of our statements after the word problem, then we do the graph, and then from the graph we try and write what the equilibrium results are. So I've written in the words in the first sheet, and then the second one's totally blank that you can practice and work on. Okay, so tough times bank example, notice it's in blue because it's going to be a supply example. The Apple stock price example was green paper because we changed demand in that situation. Okay, so here we go. Ready? The first couple of slides we're going to show that there's this is the final example of what we're going to do. We're going to have an increase in supply. That's mechanically in the model as we study it. We'll learn that it will be graphically illustrated by a shift right, and the equilibrium price will come down and more of the stock will be traded. The bad news from the word problem for Tough Times Bank, their bad earnings news causes an increase in the number of sellers. Well, the number of sellers is this thing called a determinant of supply. When you change a determinant of supply, that causes a change in supply. 3 words, change in supply, and that's graphically illustrated by a shift of the entire supply curve. Okay, so some tricky phrases coming up in these next couple of videos, but that's why we want to try and help you. Okay, so then notice it's similar to the demand side. We're going to try and have it recognize the determinant that changed, whether it's determinant, demand, or supply, then mention that in the first statement. Then we want to focus in on the directional changes of that determinant and how it would, what the direction would be the change in demand or supply. Then once we find that change in demand or supply, we're going to try to mention in words how we're going to graphically illustrate, then we're going to do the graph. Okay, does that make sense? And then the next slide is where we're going to repeat this graph coming up, okay? But for a moment, I want to thank right away Betsy, our producer, who's here, always here, much more than me even, I think. One of these days we're going to try and get some sleep. We're trying to get this going in the summer here of 2012. Our other 2 assistants, Courtney, and sometimes she goes by the nickname Corsley because she has a part-time job working for Coors. Her dad gave her that nickname. And Jake, our photographer, Courtney, helps with all the, she's the brainiac, that helps so much. And I'm going to get behind the camera again. They are off actually in a special volunteer situation. I think they're going to put it up on Facebook and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, I'll be right back. I'm going to jump behind the camera and show you what we're going to do. Okay, so this time around, right there's going to be the 3rd graph, and remember the 4th statement is going to be the equilibrium results. Remember all that? Okay, and I just wanted to you guys can try to take a look at this. I'm going to see if I can have you pause it, and you can get all those terms down, what the symbols mean. Hey, look, there's the website address. The technical people call that a URL, a Uniform Resource Locator, I think. And remember, we're doing the quadrant 1 of the Cartesian plane graph space, right? Cartesian plane geometry space. And then we're trying to do this philosophy, right? Sorry for all you education experts out there. This is way too quick, but some people say the first couple steps of learning is to recognize and memorize things, then you begin to understand them. And then there's always a big jump to the applications, and a lot of even the introductory courses in econ are at that application level. So I need you guys to go study the definitions and recognize and memorize them and understand them. And then my goal is to, with this video series and these packages we're creating, to help you out with the application so you can make an A or B in your class, or just, if you're, again, who could this help? The economics help videos. They could obviously help, especially the introductory students of micro and macroeconomics. I think it could, some review for some professionals or mom or dads out there, maybe even some new stuff, why markets are so important, some stuff about prices. And I think it could even help some high schoolers or middle schoolers. Maybe they're getting bored with math, they're not sure which way to go. They could come in here and do this for sure, some of this stuff, right, if they practice it. And that's the key, right, to practice this kind of stuff, right, that we're trying to work on by hand. Now, a couple more things. Once again, this is video supply 00S. The TTB is Tough Times Bank. Then we're going to do a bunch of background videos. We're going to split these up into separate videos for supply. The supply 01S background, I'll let you guys, if you're going to study with me, you want to write these notes down, but that's what's coming up in the future, right? The 03S is the determinants of supply, right, where the number of sellers would be on that list. And then when we have a change in a determinant, we change supply. Once again, very similar to demand, there's a tricky rule. The 3-word phrase change in supply is totally different than the 4-word phrase change in quantity supply. And there's a couple different ways it's different, but here's one of the ways in the graph. A change in quantity supply is graphically illustrated by movement along the same supply curve. But if you have a change in supply, the 3-word one, that's what we're doing today, that's graphically illustrated by a shift of the entire supply curve. And increase in supply would be a shift right, a decrease in supply, a shift left. Okay? So let's go back to what we're going to do today. Sorry, see if I can do this right. Jake is so much better at all this. I'm so sorry, Jake. I hope I'm not messing up too much. I think I got it right. Okay. So this is the final graph that we're going to wind up doing in a minute here. In our word problem, in the story, it's telling us somewhere in there that there's just really some bad news about either the revenues or the expenses, and that leads to the profit, right? In accounting, sales revenue minus some type of expenses leads to some type of net income. In the everyday business world, they would call that profit. In the finance world, they'll call that earnings, right? So bad earnings are going to cause an increase in the number of sellers of TTB bank stock. And we're trying to figure out if we can use the demand and supply model to help us come up with a framework to think about that. It's going to be very, very logical, right? Very commonsensical. And sometimes you'll say, geez, Tommy, I could have thought it out now before. But I'm telling you, if you get this model down, it'll really train your brain on how to think about a lot of other marketplaces too. And it'll help you obviously practically with the financial markets. Okay, so we read in our story that the number of sellers has changed. There's been an increase in it. So we're not worried about the direction in the first statement. We just say the number of sellers is a determinant of supply. How do we know that? We're just going to study it in the next couple of videos, and it would be in your textbook if you're going to be formally taking the class, you know, coming up this semester or the following semester or something, sometime in the future. But that's one of the list of the basic determinants of supply. Then we know that there's going to be an increase in the number of sellers. Well, logically, if there's a lot more people selling, that's going to cause an increase in supply, right? It would make sense. Now, the mechanics of the model, similar to demand, an increase in demand was graphically illustrated by a shift right of the demand curve. The supply curve is totally different people, and it's totally different function, but the mechanics of the model are very similar. An increase in the number of sellers causes an increase in supply, and the graphical illustration statement says an increase in supply may be graphically illustrated by a shift right of the entire supply curve. Okay? So now we can go ahead and do the graph. And I got to jump behind the things, slide it over so we can do the next two presentation slides. Again, sorry for the goofiness. We're doing this goofiness on purpose almost, right? Trying to be silly. To say, look, you guys, you're going to get this down when you can do it by hand. Right? Let's see if I can get this right. Or you got to be able to do it by hand. I hope I'm aiming right. There we go. In order to do the model best. Okay, so we're going to do the graph right now. I sort of cheated it. You always want to label the graph, right? The market for tough times bank TTB stock. And here we know there's going to be a change in supply such that there's an increase in supply, and that's going to happen by shifting to the right. Now, we always keep it real simple here most of the time. So if we're going to have a change in supply, we're not going to change demand. We're just going to let that ride. So that's going to be one of the first things we draw. But before we draw anything about demand and supply, we have to draw the shell, the axes, right, the quadrant one. And instead of y and x, on the vertical axis, we're going to label that price. And on the horizontal axis, we're going to label that quantity. Okay? So I sort of started it off here a little bit. Sorry for my glasses. Okay, so here's the basic axes, and price expressed in terms of dollars on the vertical axis. Quantity per time period. Different marketplaces have different time periods that they're interested in. Financial markets will be very short time periods. People, they're popping off pretty quick, but other markets might have a longer time frame, per week, per month, per year, something like that. Here's the origin. So that's the demand and supply model shell. Okay. Now we're going to change supply. So the first thing we want to do is recognize we're not going to change demand, so we're just going to draw a demand curve by itself first to get that one done. Demand curve, as we move from left to right, will fall, displaying the law of demand, which is a negative relationship between price going up and quantity demand coming down, right? Price and quantity demand are negatively related. So that's graphically illustrated by a negatively sloped demand curve. A negatively sloped demand curve is graphically illustrated by falling as you move from left to right. Now, the supply curve, which in the future videos we're going to go into those details, that is positively sloped. When price goes up, the amount that producers and sellers want to offer for sale, quantity supply, is going to go up too. Price is something good on the supply side, it's revenue per unit. So that's graphically illustrated as we move from left to right, a positive relationship by a line that rises, okay? Now we're going to shift the supply curve to the right, so practically speaking, we don't want to draw the first supply curve way out to the right, we'll run out of room. So we'll come back in a little bit and draw our first supply curve, and at the top stop and label it up top, and put that as S1, our first supply curve. Okay. Then, let me see if I'll do that in order. At the intersection, and we're going to do more videos about equilibrium in the future too, but we've been just recognizing that the intersection is the balancing point. So the balancing price, whoops, I want to try to use this guy. We move around these graphs in a perpendicular fashion, right? 90-degree angles. So from that point we come 90 degrees off, and we're going to mark that as PE1, and the E word is what we say first. It's a subscript, but equilibrium price 1, and then we're going to go perpendicular down to the quantity axis. Sorry for the P. That's going to be QE1, and once again, E comes first, equilibrium quantity 1, because we're coming off supply, okay? Now, if we're going to have an increase in supply, we need to graphically illustrate that by shifting it to the right. So I just usually move over and try to draw something like a parallel line, right, to the first supply curve. Okay, so I'm going to come over here and go. There's S2, and up where the S's are, the labels, we want to draw an arrow and point that to the right. Not up or down, it has to be horizontally pointing to the right. And then back here, where there's out of the way from the labels, I just want to emphasize the idea that we're shifting to the right, so I always draw a second one, okay? Now, at the intersection of supply 2, you have to imagine, have a great imagination, that S1 is no longer relevant and it's not there, okay? So we're going to have a new equilibrium at the intersection of supply curve 2 and demand curve D. See if I can get the right pen here. And we'll mark that. And then we'll go perpendicular 90 degrees off to the price axis, and we'll label that P subscript E2, PE2, but the words would be equilibrium price 2, and then perpendicular down to the quantity axis, perpendicular down, and that would be QE2, or again, the E word first, equilibrium quantity 2. So we would notice that the equilibrium quantity is increased. Remember the number line, right? Going from left to right, the numbers are increasing. So I'm just going to sort of emphasize those arrows. But what has happened to the equilibrium price? Right? We went from PE1 down to PE2. Well, on the vertical axis, if you're coming down, that's a decrease, right? So there's a decrease in the equilibrium price. Okay? So we've just mentioned exactly what the equilibrium results will be. So there's the graph, we redid it, right? We did a pretty good job, right? Okay, so the equilibrium results statement is the fourth statement. We're just pulling out all the parts of these kinds of questions, right? The equilibrium results of an increase in supply are, and then in my classes I'm always jumping up and down with all this energy going, look at the graph, you guys, the answer is on the graph. And here it is, right? When we look at the graph, so that you don't have to write that in there, right? There's going to be a decrease in equilibrium price and an increase in equilibrium quantity. Okay, pretty cool, huh? So whenever you hear on the news that, some company's stock price has been going down or something along those lines. This is a very similar scenario. Something has gone wrong that's going to impact their earnings in a negative way, and you can follow the details of that. But this is how we would handle it in the demand and supply model. And this is a great model to understand all kinds of marketplaces, right, in our world. Now I'm going to once again jump behind the video and review this again, and I'll maybe even show you the demand stuff to review that. Okay, so what do we do? There's the original graph. We just want to show you the final thing. Then we got some bad news. There's the 3 statements. Those 3 statements help us tell us what to do with the graph that we just did. And then from the graph, we get our equilibrium result statement. Oh, look, there's the website address again. How about that? Okay, and once again, I'm going to try and do this. This will probably be too quick for you. Sorry. Oh, there's Jake's going to kill me. There's all the terms, right, the symbols and what they mean, so you might need to pause that. And a little bit of a review of math, right, with the Cartesian plane and number line stuff. We're just using quadrant 1, and instead of y, we use price. Instead of x, we're using quantity. And there's I apologize to the education people again, but you guys can get the definitions and terms and new concepts down, and then I'll help you with the applications, applying them in a graph or table or some formulas or something like that. And then who's this for? Okay, I think it could be for lots of people going up, but I love this stuff like crazy, so I'm pretty boring, I think. And then once again, this has been video 00S for Tough Times Bank. And I'm just going to go through this quickly. There's the next few videos of background. Remember these phrases, right? This tricky rule of the theme of these next couple of videos as we study the details of the supply side of things. Change in supply is not the same thing as a change in quantity supply. And then there's how you graphically illustrate them. And then if it's not too much of a mess, sorry, over here on this part of our office, do you remember, look at the mechanics, you guys. Remember the Apple one? There was great news there. But we did the same 3 things. There, the great news led to an increase in the number of buyers. And then we just did the same steps and we came up with an increase in demand. Well, the demand curve shifts to the right. Right? Do you see what happens there? PE1 to PE2. In that case, there was an increase in the price and an increase in the equilibrium quantity also. So we did the same stuff, right? The equilibrium result, so that right from the graph was an increase in equilibrium price and an increase in equilibrium quantity. Oh, geez, there's the website again. There's the graph. And once again, similar phrases on the demand side, right? Change in demand is not the same thing as a change in quantity demand. A change in quantity demand is, sorry for the shadows, is graphically illustrated by a movement along the same demand curve. A change in demand, you have to shift the whole curve, right? If there's an increase, we shift right. If there's a decrease, we shift left. Okay, I can't believe I just did that. Jake's gonna kill me for not being so fancy enough. But let me just come back and say a couple more things. Hey, thank you so much, right? One more time, we're doing this low tech on purpose, right? Because you need to if you're trying to get this down, you gotta do this by hand. You gotta get a stack of paper out, maybe green for demand stuff, blue for supply stuff. You gotta get your copybook out. You gotta sit at the table with your book, maybe with my help videos, and write this stuff out to really understand it. Even if you're doing multiple choice questions, right? I make my students draw this stuff. We don't do multiple choice. But 90% of you will probably have to do multiple choice in your tests. And you gotta draw this stuff to get like 3 or 4 or 5 of the multiple choice questions correct. Okay. Thanks again, everybody, for viewing the video, and we'll see you soon, okay? Thanks a lot.